Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Tuesday, March 12th, 2019. On a personal note, I feel a little liberated, at least I got my evenings back, because yesterday I submitted all of my tax information to the accountant and kissed it goodbye for another year. And I treated myself to a club gig last night, went to San Francisco, and saw one of my favorite goth acts from the 80s, Peter Murphy, performing. He did a whole set of one of his albums called Deep, which is one of my favorites, and it was a really good show. So San Francisco's own Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. And over the past few days, in Democratic caucuses and in interviews, mostly with the Washington Post, she has all but slammed the door on impeachment for Donald Trump. Now, the line that's taken out of context is, he's just not worth it. And what she actually said is a little bit more than that, which is that it is such a distraction that, well, here's the quote. She told the Post on March 6th that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country, and he's just not worth it. Now, let this sink in a little bit, because this is the president the Democrats have blasted on an almost daily basis, claiming that he colluded with Russia to secure the election. That hasn't been proven. Claiming that he is an existential threat to what passes for democracy in the U.S. in 2019. And we see the daily reporting on his criminal behavior, his fraud, his graft, his corruption, and he clearly has obstructed justice. And as I have argued from day one of his installation, he has been vulnerable to impeachment because of the tacky deal around the Trump-Washington Hotel, the emoluments clause. The Democrats have delayed and deferred and dragged this out, said we're waiting for Mueller. And in a moment, the latest Aaron Mate piece on the Mueller probe, it's like waiting for Godot. Do I have any Beckett fans out there? So, as you may know if you're a regular listener, I think Nancy Pelosi is wrong. At minimum, she should remain ambiguous to keep Trump off balance, on or off his toes, on his toes, whatever that phrase should be. And yes, she has left some wiggle room that if Mueller, pulls up some big bombshell, that she could pivot. But to declare at this stage that you don't have the votes in the Senate to remove, therefore you don't impeach, I'm sorry, that is flat-out cowardice. And it may be a correct political calculation. But I believe that we are past the time for calculating politicians and calculated decisions. And we've got Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic caucus chair. We did not run on impeachment. We did not win on impeachment. We are not governing with a focus on impeachment. Well, it's true, the Democrats ducked it. And as I argued last year, if they had run on impeachment as a reason to elect a Democratic majority, it would have forced Republicans to take a position on their deeply corrupt president. But they got a pass. Nevertheless, they were able to tag Democrats as the party of impeachment. It wasn't terribly effective based on the outcome, but they ran on impeachment, even if the Democrats didn't. Newcomer Rashida Tlaib of Detroit, the one who tweeted, we're going to impeach the mofo. She said regardless of Pelosi's statement, she's drafting an impeachment resolution she plans to file. She said, now look, Pelosi and all members have always encouraged us to represent our districts. This is something very important to my residents. This doesn't mean we're voting on it, she said. It means we are beginning the process to look at some of these alleged claims, these impeachable offenses. And there are several impeachment resolutions that have been introduced in the past. Brad Sherman from Sherman Oaks in Southern California. I believe that Maxine Waters has filed articles of impeachment, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Pramila Jayapal from Seattle, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, says voters really are angry about what's perceived to be happening in the White House, and Congress has an obligation to see where the facts lead. I don't think it's something we decide whether or not it's worth it. If it's a consistent pattern of abuse of power, of obstruction of justice, then that to me seems like it will be impeachable. Elijah Cummings falling in line with Pelosi, as is Karen Bass, chair of the Black Caucus. Bass, a former Speaker of the Assembly here in California. Impeachment right now is a complete distraction. We have a very proactive agenda. Oh, come on, Karen. Whatever's proactive on your agenda cannot clear the Senate right now, just like impeachment. So why not work on it? And it's important to note that when Nixon was impeached, the Republicans didn't come around until the hearings were well underway and the evidence was aired out. So Pelosi even referenced when she spoke to reporters on Monday night that she had tabled impeachment in 2007 for George W. Bush. And this is a tone-deaf remark for her to make, because there's still plenty of people like me who criticize her for that move back then. I didn't believe it then, she says. I don't believe in it now. It divides the country unless there's some conclusive evidence that takes us to that place. Well, what the hell do you need? That is insulting. She went on to say, we have run on a platform that talked about an agenda to lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and saving the pre-existing condition benefit. Bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America and cleaner government. That's our agenda. To take our eye off that ball is not worth it. Come on, Nancy. Most of the things that you just referenced are not achievable in the current political climate, with Republicans in control of the Senate and Trump in the White House. Gerald Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, he agrees with me. I took an oath to the Constitution, not to the Democratic Party. If I feel that I have a constitutional obligation to follow that procedure, then I have a legal and moral obligation to do so, even if no Republican wants to do anything. And then Tom Steyer, the billionaire who's dropped $50 million so far running ads supporting impeachment. He's ticked. I thought we were waiting for the Mueller report. I thought we were waiting to get the information. There's more than enough information to show that this president is the most lawless president. He has easily met any criteria for impeachment, and the question is, are we going to do the right thing and stand up for the Constitution and the American people? According to Nancy Pelosi, that answer is nah. Here's another Democrat, David Cicilline of Rhode Island. If the facts require us to initiate removing the president, we are obligated to do it. Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, criticized Pelosi's suggestion that Trump isn't worth it. The question is whether the Republic is worth it. And a columnist at the Washington Post echoes what I said earlier. The majority support for Nixon's impeachment didn't develop until after the inquiry commenced. And this cannot be the threshold for beginning an investigation, an impeachment process. So, as you know, I'm deeply frustrated by this. It's a reason why I don't identify as a Democrat, and I am not a member of the Democratic Party. And as long as this kind of bullshit continues, I'm going to keep it that way. Now to Aaron Mate's clear-eyed, no-nonsense analysis of Russiagate published today at The Nation. Some juicy quotes here. As we await the rumored delivery of Mueller's final report, it's looking increasingly unlikely that the document will allege a Trump-Russia conspiracy. To date, Mueller's numerous indictments, voluminous court filings have not accused a single American of collusion with Russia. Tellingly, prominent media and political voices who've spent 2 years raising expectations that Mueller will find it are now quietly moving the goalposts. Last week, Michael Cohen said he's seen no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. He knocked down several pillars of the conjecture surrounding it, including that he had never been to Prague, which is a big dent in the credibility of the Steele dossier. And Mattei cites the January report from BuzzFeed News. They still have not retracted it, claiming that Mueller has evidence that Trump directed Cohen to lie to Congress. This triggered the rather unusual statement from Mueller's office that the report was not accurate, but it didn't say why. And then in his public testimony last week, Cohen said Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. So BuzzFeed got that wrong, and it fueled a whole cycle of reporting saying this is the strongest evidence to date of collusion. And if that's the strongest evidence, then we've got very weak evidence to support these claims. And BuzzFeed tries to re-spin it, saying, well, you know, Cohen and Trump had this code. They knew what they were talking about. But it is not fair to say that Trump personally instructed Cohen to lie. That is false. Also, Cohen undercut the innuendo and conjecture triggered by reports that the Trump Organization was planning to offer Putin a $50 million penthouse in the Moscow project. Cohen dismissed it as a marketing stunt proposed by Felix Sater. Proponents of the collusion theory continue to hope one emerges in the case of former campaign chair Paul Manafort. And he has been sentenced once. He gets his next second and final prison sentence presumably tomorrow in the Washington courtroom. Back to Mattei. According to Mueller, the FBI assesses that Kilimnik has an unspecified relationship with Russian intelligence. The alleged lie goes to the heart of the special counsel's mandate. That's Manafort's alleged lie while he was supposed to be cooperating. No indictments have resulted from this issue, and it makes no appearance in Mueller's 2 sentencing memos in Manafort's case. And this issue of sharing polling data with a Russian, going to the heart of the investigation? But the Manafort cases don't relate to the Mueller investigation. They caught him in financial crimes and in lying about, not registering as a foreign agent, and those sorts of things. Mattei speculates if the polling data is evidence of Trump-Russian collusion, then Mueller has yet to allege it. And so we've got Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff now running the House Intelligence Committee. Schiff was asked, do you have direct evidence of Trump-Russia collusion? And he cited the email sent by the music publicist to set up the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians about the Magnitsky Act. And the guy who sent that email, Rob Goldstone, says it was publicist puff. I had no idea what I was talking about. And Mattei notes that to date, Mueller has given us no reason to challenge that assessment. And so, well, one more quote here. While insisting that there is pretty compelling evidence of collusion, Schiff now hedges by cautioning that Democrats should not attempt to impeach Trump in the absence of very graphic evidence. Well, Adam Schiff has not explicitly called Trump's behavior treasonous, but he has allowed people to use that term based on the speculative information and claims that Schiff has promoted in his almost nightly appearances on the Rachel Maddow Show on MSDNC. I've linked to Aaron Matei's latest dispatch in the show file for today's podcast, and I encourage you to read it. Meanwhile, New York State Attorney General, her name is Letitia James, has launched an investigation issuing subpoenas to Deutsche Bank and Investors Bank for records related to the financing of 4 major Trump Organization projects. This is driven by Cohen's testimony and the evidence that he brought forward these phony financial statements that Trump used to try to secure loans. That's bank fraud. That's a crime. That's an impeachable offense, but don't tell Nancy Pelosi. I've been kind of holding back on this reporting about the woman named Li Yang, also known as Cindy Yang. She was the original owner of the massage parlor where the sting operation caught Robert Kraft getting 2 blowjobs in a 24-hour period before he went off to a playoff game. And the plot thickens because Cindy Yang has been hanging at Mar-a-Lago. She got a bunch of selfies with Trump, including as they watched the Super Bowl together. She's also been trafficking access to Trump. She had a Chinese-language website that was taken down yesterday, offering her clients access to Trump either at Mar-a-Lago or, at least dangling access to the White House. And one event that was on the website was about a conference at Mar-a-Lago scheduled for later in March, where Donald Trump's sister, who is a federal court judge, was listed as her guest speaker. And I'm trying to remember that guy who gave money to Clinton and he was exposed. He was a Chinese national. And he said, it's just like putting money in the subway. Access to the White House. You write a check for $100,000. So this is seamy because Yang was the owner of the massage parlor. She apparently still owns other massage parlors. And there are reports that she is an officer in 2 Chinese government-related organizations. We are not jumping to a conclusion that she is a spy, but probably she does report to people in China. And speaking of foreign influence, the Jeb Bush for President campaign back in 2016 and its super PAC called the Right to Rise PAC have received one of the largest ever, I think the third largest financial penalty ever issued by the Federal Elections Commission, which is generally considered to be toothless, and it is, because they don't have a full complement of members, they never have a majority of either party, and they basically just do nothing most of the time. But the Right to Rise PAC has been fined $550,000, the Right to Rise USA PAC $390,000, and this is because Jeb's brother Neil, who is a felon, he took a plea deal after fleecing the Silverado savings and loan of more than $1 billion in the 1980s, and Neil was given a job running one of these super PACs. And he did get legal advice that said under Citizens United, it's okay to take money from foreign nationals if they launder it through a domestic American corporation. And apparently this is a loophole that is being widely used, but they forgot to cross some T's and dot some I's, and they got caught. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I hit the P.O. Box a couple of days ago. Rex Wetzel, the blue dot in a sea of red in Wolcottsville, Indiana. Wolcottville, there's no S there. He just renewed his annual subscription. Like clockwork, Paul L. Sesser and John Zwiebel's monthly contributions are right there. I want to acknowledge David Cisney in Port Orchard, Washington, just renewed an annual subscription, as did Robin Gilbert in North Hills, California, in the Los Angeles area. I really appreciate the support that people show me, and I invite you to join in. And a lot of people are allergic to PayPal. That's why I have a P.O. Box. You can direct your contributions or any correspondence to me at Box 150 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. And if you don't have a subscription, accept my friendly and gentle reminder that you can take one out at any time, even right now. The legitimate government of Venezuela, headed by Nicolas Maduro, is investigating the pretend president, Juan Guaido, for leading a sabotage of the electrical system in Venezuela that has left the country without power in most areas for 3 or 4 days now. And while the word chaos is widely used in all the media I saw today about Venezuela, chaos, 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 let's remember that we left portions of Puerto Rico in the dark for as long as 11 months. And people died premature deaths because they couldn't access medical facilities, dialysis, those sorts of things. And our media is spinning up this instant outrage about lives being threatened and perhaps lost in Venezuela because of this power outage, and they're blaming the Maduro government, and this is another humanitarian reason that we must conduct a regime change process. And it is so outrageous because at the Gray Zone Project, Max Blumenthal reports that Juan Guaido attended a training session run by a U.S.-funded soft power organization back in 2010. And it talks about exploiting nationwide blackouts caused by a major failure at the Simon Bolivar hydroelectric plant at the Guri Dam. And now it has occurred. Now, at this point, I don't have enough information to prove why the power grid collapsed in Venezuela. But as Gray Zone reports, Marco Rubio, the Florida Republican senator, basically predicted at noon on March 7th, he called for the U.S. to stir widespread unrest. It needs to happen in order to achieve regime change. Quote, Venezuela is going to enter a period of suffering no nation in our hemisphere has confronted in modern history. 5 hours later, the power grid went down. And 18 minutes after that, Rubio took to Twitter to announce the blackout, claim that backup generators have failed. It is unclear how Rubio obtained such specific information so soon after the outage occurred. Back in Caracas, Guaido immediately set out to exploit the situation just as his trainers had advised over 8 years before. On Twitter, he said the light will return when the usurpation of Maduro ends. 2 days later, Guaido was at the center of opposition rally that he convened in an affluent eastern Caracas area, bellowing into a megaphone. Article 187 when the time comes. We need to be in the streets, mobilized. It depends on us, not on anybody else. Article 187 in the Constitution of Venezuela establishes the right of the National Assembly to authorize the use of Venezuelan military missions in the country. And supporters chanted, intervention, intervention. Now, there are many people who cannot see this orchestrated narrative, who cannot see, despite the reveal by the New York Times yesterday, that on February 23rd, the firebombing of the U.S. humanitarian aid at the Colombia-Venezuelan border was done by opponents of Maduro, not his supporters. Over in Britain, the Brexit situation is reaching its deadline. And just moments ago, Theresa May suffered a second humiliating defeat as members of Parliament rejected last-minute reassurances and voted it down by a majority of 149. There are only 17 days to go. Now, she is going to table a motion so that members of Parliament can debate on Wednesday whether the United Kingdom should leave the EU without a deal on the 29th of March. And then on Thursday, whether to request an extension to Article 50. So far, she is not conceding the call by many for a second referendum. And the Labour Party says it will now press for a softer Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn, quote, I believe there's a majority in this House for the sort of sensible, credible, and negotiable deal that labor has set out. I don't know the particulars of that deal, but it is quite messy. Of all major nations that fly Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft, the United States is the only major one that has so far not grounded that fleet of airliners. As you know, 157 people died on Sunday when an Ethiopian Airlines plane crashed. And while it's still being investigated, it showed some of the same weird moves of a distressed flight shortly after takeoff that led to the crash of the Lion Air flight just a few months ago. And of course, Boeing is a major federal contractor. They grease all of our politicians with massive campaign contributions. They cite their factories and their suppliers in congressional districts that give them greater leverage on the Hill. And the public safety of Americans is secondary to that power relationship that Boeing has. Elizabeth Warren last week gave a speech where she called for breaking up the big tech companies, including Facebook. Yesterday, some ads for her presidential campaign that included that message were blocked by Facebook. Now, Facebook did investigate, and they restored the ads after saying that an algorithm took them down because of its use of the Facebook corporate logo. But Senator Warren on Twitter, curious why I think Facebook has too much power? Let's start with their ability to shut down a debate over whether Facebook has too much power. Today, I'm releasing an in-depth interview with Adam Eichen, a young activist who is working with Lawrence Lessig's organization in Massachusetts. They are proposing that Democratic primaries, which are going to be very crowded next year based on the number of people running so far, use ranked choice voting so that you can go into the poll and you can say your first choice is Tulsi Gabbard. And if she doesn't win, your second choice is Bernie Sanders. Your third choice might be Elizabeth Warren. And you might even support the fracker John Hickenlooper. By using ranked choice voting, we could give people a greater role in determining the ultimate nominee. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Adam Eichen.
But in the presidential primary, I see such potential for the truest expression of voter preference because the media is going to be covering the differences between everyone in the primary every single day, every single hour. They're going to be inspecting to the 10th degree how different they are and what issues, who stands for what. And so I think in a presidential primary, especially in New Hampshire, which is going to be the first primary in the nation, it's the first in the nation primary, voters are going to have a really good sense of their top 3, top 5 candidates. And so I think that the results there are going to actually be representative, that you won't see some of the downsides of implementing it on a municipal level when doing it on a real national scale where the media is in New Hampshire. They have people stationed there to cover it every single day. And that's exciting. And another thing that I want to say, the reason why I think I'm personally so excited about taking on this campaign is because I think if New Hampshire were to decide to use ranked choice voting in the presidential primaries, every single news outlet, when covering the New Hampshire primary, would have to include a section on what ranked choice voting means.
Yes, they would.
It would be the greatest benefit to the democracy movement as it pertains to alternate ways to count votes.
I'm releasing the full interview with Adam Eichen today to all my subscribers at peterbcollins.com, at TuneIn, iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher. Norman Solomon has a column that's being widely posted on progressive outlets with a lot of truth about Joe Biden and his sketchy history as a servant of corporate power and a man who is proud of his connections with wealthy people. And there's quite a litany here. I'm not going to run it all down for you, but I think it is instructive for people who might be thinking that Joe Biden could be a possible candidate and somebody who could beat Trump in 2020. Just another indication that Fortress America has lifted the drawbridge. The Trump administration is preparing to close down all 21 international offices of U.S. citizenship and immigration services. That could slow the processing of family visa applications, foreign adoptions, and citizenship petitions from members of the military. There's a big scandal announced by the FBI today. No, they didn't break up Atomwaffen or other rings of white supremacist armed groups in the country. And no, they didn't frame another Muslim American for alleged domestic terrorism intentions. They are busting 33 parents charged with scamming college application systems. They've charged dozens of people that involve wealthy parents, including Hollywood celebrities and prominent business leaders, paying bribes to get their kids into elite American universities. Now, I don't deny that this is a problem. When our son was applying to colleges, turned into be this massive extraction. Most kids now apply to as many as a dozen schools. And the application process itself is a revenue center for major schools. And there is no question that people game the system. They use legacy appointments, legacy access. They use contributions. And the two Hollywood stars who are named are Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman, along with admissions counselors, coaches, a fashion designer, a lawyer. Boy, FBI really has its priorities well set, wouldn't you say? In New York, protesters are gaining momentum as they try to block the construction of a pipeline, 23-mile-long underwater pipeline through New York's Lower Bay, intended to bring fracked gas from Pennsylvania to the Big Apple. It's a $1 billion project running through New Jersey, the Rockaways in Queens. And Robert Wood of 350.org says this pipeline would incentivize reliance on gas, which is way more carbon-intensive than renewables. It would be a nightmare happening not in a rural area, but right here in New York City. And a study shows that New York is already well on its way to eliminating the dirtiest types of oil that are used for heating, and that expansion of renewable energy and planned improvements should be ramped up before considering construction of costly and potentially risky infrastructure. Well, as long as Bezos isn't involved, maybe this will get a fair hearing. And finally today, I want to recommend a powerful commentary written by a man who knows what he's talking about. I'm a big fan of Chris Hedges. He's a writer and commentator these days. He was once the New York Times Mideast bureau chief. He knows a lot about the power of the Israel lobby, and he writes powerfully about it. He says the lobby's campaign of vicious character assassination, smearing and blacklisting against those who defend Palestinian rights is not an anti-Semitic trope. It is a fact. He also says 24 state governments' passage of Israel lobby-backed legislation requiring workers and contractors to sign a pro-Israel oath promise not to support BDS is not an anti-Semitic trope. It's a fact. The well-funded campaigns by the Israel lobby, which works closely with Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs to discredit any American politician who even slightly deviates from Israeli policy, is not an anti-Semitic trope. It is a fact. And one more, the massive interference in our internal affairs by Israel and the lobby, far exceeding that of any other country, including Russia or China, is not an anti-Semitic trope. It is a fact. And Hedges goes deep on the information that we have cited from the suppressed Al Jazeera documentary about the lobby. I'm glad that this is getting aired out. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.